When I arrived at Loyola in 2008, the first person to greet me was John Stewart. And then the second person to greet me was Jerry Savage. My assistant came in and she told me that a guy by the name of Jerry Savage had arranged to come in and meet with me. So, of course, I didn't really know much, if anything, about who this man was that would be coming to meet me. John filled me in a little bit on who he was. And to be quite honest, I was a little uncomfortable because I had heard so much about him. I had heard so much about his success as a basketball coach. I had heard so much about his success in leading with such great character and with great humility. So needless to say, as the new guy here, I was unsettled until he walked in the room. And I was totally disarmed by his humility, his personality, and his immediate and clear care and concern for Loyola and everything Loyola. And it was a great privilege of my life to be able to get to know Jerry over those years, not as well as many of you here, but what an honor it certainly was for me to have had that opportunity. So I'm so grateful that you're all here tonight to join us to honor Jerry's legacy and to honor the legacy of Loyola basketball, of which Jerry is a significant part. I'm so grateful as well on behalf of Loyola to welcome so many members of Jerry's family here tonight, and most especially his lovely wife, Pat. Thanks for being here. And thanks to each of you, of course, again, for honoring us with your presence. It's also so appropriate that I extend my appreciation and gratitude for our panelists who have joined us here this evening and who, in their own special way, have very special relationships with Jerry. I'd like to introduce them now, and then they'll be coming up momentarily. But first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Snuffy Smith, Loyola class of 1960. Mr. Pete Budko, Loyola class of 1977. Mr. Tony Guy, Loyola class of 1978. And Terrence, who is en route. Each of these gentlemen have played a very important and significant role in the history of Loyola basketball. And I know that we're all very much looking forward to hearing from them tonight. Loyola owes a very special thanks to three men in particular, whose tireless efforts on behalf of Coach Savage and Loyola have led us here tonight. So I'd like to give them some recognition now. And first, once again, Mr. Snuffy Smith. Mr. Mark Rohde, Loyola class of 1972. And Mr. Brian Plunkett, Loyola class of 1976. These men have led the way for all of us here over many, many months that, as I said, have brought us here tonight. They have garnered the support from alumni and friends of Loyola, and ensuring that the impact of Coach Savage's legacy here at Loyola continues and continues to be celebrated. So thank you again, Snuffy, Mark, and Brian. So the proceeds from this event, including sponsorship and so many other generous gifts, all benefit the Jerry Savage Merit Scholarship Fund. This fund continues to honor the memory of Coach Jerry Savage and helps us to continue the proud tradition of excellence that Jerry demonstrated during his time here at Loyola. The scholarship provides an opportunity for Loyola to attract Loyola Dons, young men who are willing to serve, young men who are ready to learn, young men who are committed to the values of an Ignatian Jesuit education. Recipients of the scholarship must first meet all of our admissions criteria. So it's important to note that we are not just attracting students who will shine on the court, but those who will be contributing in a number of ways to this community, demonstrating intellectual ambition and showing a deep commitment to their spiritual growth. And this is what Jerry Savage would have wanted. This initiative, from day one, has had my full support, as well as the support of the Loyola Board of Trustees. And we are so very proud of the progress and work thus far. And we are excited as we celebrate the storied past and invest in a very, very bright future for Loyola basketball. So together we will continue to make Coach Savage very proud and his family. So thanks again. Thanks again for being here. Thanks again for being a part of this initiative. Thank you for your love of Loyola. Thank you for bleeding blue and gold. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to our benefactors. And your generosity will go so far in honoring the legacy of Coach Savage and creating extraordinary opportunities for our Dons. I'm also privileged tonight to introduce our moderator for the evening. Mr. Paul McMullen is currently the managing editor of the Catholic Review. Paul served as a sports reporter for the Baltimore Sun from 1981 to 2007, where he covered anything from Olympic Games to NCAA basketball to high school sports to the Ravens' first Super Bowl victory, and much more. Paul is also the author of 2 books. They're not available in the back for purchase right now, but his first book, Maryland Basketball, Tales from Cole Field. His second book, Amazing Pace, the story of Olympic champion Michael Phelps. Paul is so well versed in the history of the Baltimore Catholic League, and when Jerry retired in 2003, it was Paul who volunteered to write that story. So we are so very fortunate to have him with us this evening, so please join me in welcoming Loyola's friend, Mr. Paul McMullen.
So I knew about Jerry Savage even before he got here to Loyola Blakefield, but learned a lot more. In the same way that I knew Jerry as a baseball coach first, I know Snuffy Smith as a coach first. I didn't quite know him as a Loyola player. Snuff, why don't you come on up? Take a seat. And I'm told you want to turn on your mic. So we might need to find a grandchild that can do that for us. Yeah, I knew Snuffy as a coach, as an assistant coach for the University of Baltimore, Wheeling College, where he worked with our Blakefield dad, Paul Baker. He spent a year at Johns Hopkins University. He was with Billy Jones at the first black basketball player in the Atlantic Coast Conference, despite what Carolina says about Charlie Scott. Billy Jones at Maryland was the first black man to play in the ACC. Snuffy worked alongside him at UMBC. Snuffy concluded his coaching career at Virginia Commonwealth. Snuffy was the first commissioner of the Baltimore Catholic League. He was a colleague of Jerry's, and Ray Wallace started this venture. He also had intimate knowledge of Jerry as a competitor, because when Jerry was a senior at Mount St. Mary's, finishing up his career there with a career free throw percentage record, the freshman at the University of Baltimore was one Snuffy Smith, so we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes, about your memories of Jerry the competitor. Yeah, some of us are old enough to remember Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Some of us are not. But you can't say Butch without Sundance. In Loyola Blakefield basketball history, you can't say Pete Budko without Tony Guy. Pete graduated in the class of 1977. He won Baltimore Catholic League tournaments as a sophomore, a junior, and a senior. Tony, come on up. Tony graduated a year later, 1978. He won PCL tournaments as a sophomore, junior, and senior. To this day, the league had its 45th tournament a couple months ago. To this day, no other team, because they're the only team that's won 4 straight Baltimore Catholic League tournaments. Loyola Blakefield, Coach Jerry Savage, when Pete left here, he had established the career scoring record. I think it was 1,467 points. It lasted 1 year. Tony finished with 1,499. Tony went out to Kansas just when ESPN was getting started. It didn't open, I think, until he was a junior at Kansas. And so we really didn't get to see his career unfold on TV like we could a kid today. But we saw a lot of Pete at North Carolina because North Carolina was on TV every Saturday. And it was a really good show. Pete became a senior at the University of North Carolina playing for the great Dean Smith. He became a starter when he was a senior. Had a bad ankle injury, lost some playing time, but he still played in the 1981 NCAA championship game against Indiana. Isaiah Thomas in Indiana beat North Carolina. And
thanks for bringing that up.
and I'm not going to mention Villanova. Pete is the chairman and CEO of the Business Development Corporation of America. He's based in New York, did you say, Pete? Let's see here. Tony was a McDonald's All-American here. He went to the University of Kansas, took the Jayhawks to the Sweet 16 in 1981. He's a 2-time co-MVP at one of the greatest college basketball programs that there is. And when Tony concluded his career let me change glasses. When he finished his Kansas career, he had 1,488 career points. That was 4th all time on the Kansas scoring list. The guy behind him at number 5 was a guy named Wilt Chamberlain. So you can appreciate the caliber of the people that you're looking at. Pete, Tony, one at a time. What made you come to Loyola Blakefield? Tony's got a good story.
You know, it's funny. I knew that this was going to be one of the questions, and I'm completely unprepared for it. It's interesting that you start with this one. It's interesting. I was actually just. It's so great coming back here. I don't get a chance enough to come back. My family's all gone now, and we sort of left roots in Baltimore. But I was talking to Father Sammons in the back of the room earlier tonight, and he told me the story about how I came to Loyola. I'll make it short because I know we don't have a lot of time, but my mother told me to come. He and Doug Derringer spoke with my mom and my dad, never spoke with me, and I was told I was going to go to Loyola. You know, you've got to remember when I came here, as a sophomore, I was very young. I had just turned 14, which means that when I suppose were talking to my parents about my future, I was 13 years old. And I was playing in probably the 13 and under leagues. The year before that, I was playing in the 10-12 leagues, rec ball, against 10-year-olds. And so here I am, at 14 years old, coming in as a sophomore and playing against the likes of the Valdereses, Larry Harrison, even our own guys. And it was a pretty heady experience. So it's fascinating. I knew this was going to be one of the questions, and thinking back, I had no idea how I ended up here. But luckily, and I can say that I'm so blessed that I did.
Thank goodness for strong parenting.
Like Pete, my mom was very influential in me coming to Loyola as well. When I was in middle school, I participated in a program called Upward Bound. On the weekends, we would go over to Johns Hopkins University and have these math and English enrichment classes. And every now and again, we would take trips out here to Loyola. They'd bus us out here, and we'd get to spend Saturday afternoons out here. In the summer of '74, a letter came to our home from Loyola High School. And the letter said that I had been invited to come out here and attend school. And I got to tell you, I thought it was the worst piece of mail that I could have ever gotten. My intention was to go to Dunbar High School. In my middle school, the gym teacher was a guy named Bob Wade. And the year that I graduated from middle school, he took the head coaching job at Dunbar. So it would have been a very easy transition for me to just go to Dunbar. And it's interesting because when the letter came that summer, my mom said, "Hey, listen, I think you ought to go to Loyola, but it's your decision." And I said, "Well, that's great, because if it's my decision, I'm going to Dunbar." So that summer, I had been telling all my friends, "Hey, I'll be with you guys. We'll be at Dunbar. We'll be at Dunbar." 3 weeks before school started, she said, "You know, I've been thinking about something." I said, "What's that?" She said, "You remember when I told you it was going to be your decision?" I said, "Yeah, I remember that very well." She said, "I've changed my mind."
Snuffy, I presume you two are the product of strong parenting. What was behind your decision to come here?
How did I get here?
Yes, sir.
I would get out Evanston Avenue to Hilton Street. We go across Hilton to Cold Spring Lane, up Cold Spring to Charles, and hang a left. I have one question before I answer that.
Yes, sir.
Seriously. Pete, I have one question for you. The rumor at the dinner tonight is that you really came here because you wanted to play with Brian Plunkett. No, I came here, I was really set to go to Mount St. Joe. I had half an athletic scholarship. I was playing at St. Barnaby's in their Catholic League on the weekends. And St. Joe just was 2 miles away from our house in Evanston Village. And I thought, yeah, that's where I'm headed. But then when I visited here and met the people, that sort of changed. So I'm here because of the Ignatian spirit.
Snuffy, tell us about Jerry the player that you went up against.
Jerry the player, I held him to 31 my freshman year. We played the Mount at a time when they were a Division II power. In fact, the year after Jerry left, they won a national championship in the college division at Evansville, which is where it was held every year. Jerry was a 1,000-point scorer at the Mount. Now, what that means is today, players play 30 or 35 games a year, and there's a 3-point line. When Jerry played, colleges were limited to 20 games a year, unless you went to your tournament. So to score 1,000 points in that period of time was phenomenal. And I can tell you from experience of playing against him in college and pick up games at Mount St. Joe when he had the keys to the gym, he could flat out shoot the ball. He was just a phenomenal offensive player, and he was very, very skilled. And if he played against a guy who was quicker, he had a jab step and a rocker step to get open for his patented jump shot, and he could hit it from just about anywhere on the court. A great team player, again, a great shooter, one of the best, and a great clinician when he taught shooting at the various summer camps. So I can attest to his ability on the court. Having been scorched that day over at Rogers Avenue.
Thanks, Snuffy. Pete, your dad played in the NBA, Walt Budko, center for the old Baltimore Bullets. You played for Dean Smith, and in between you played for Jerry Savage. Can you compare and contrast the three men for us?
Well, I can attest to Jerry's acumen on the court. Many of you don't know, Jerry would play with us when we practiced, and I think Plunkett held him to 40 points one game when we scrimmaged. He could flat out play. But the most memorable aspect, I think, of Jerry was, you're right, he sort of bookended my father and Dean Smith as coaches. My father coached me when I was very young for a number of years, and all three of them were very similar in terms of the type of men that they were. And I've told many of you many times before, I've been very blessed that I've had those three men in my life. None of them, and I can honestly say, I don't think I ever heard a curse word from any of them in my entire life. And that says something about them. I don't think I've heard a prejudiced, biased inclination from any of them in my entire life. And that's what shapes young men, that's what shapes middle-aged men and old men. And as I said, I was very young when I came to Loyola. And as a result, I suppose very impressionable. Loyola gave me, the Catholic League gave me the stage to compete. I played against guys who were probably 5, 6, maybe 7, 8 years older than me. I mean, it's probably the first time I played against guys with hair on their chest and their face. I mentioned some of the greats that we played against. And I think if it wasn't for the demeanor, the character that Jerry was and had, I could have easily gone a different way. I remember one game, I forget who we were playing, and I have to say, watching Jerry's interview, Pat, I don't know how you survived all those years, because with that memory, my wife remembers what I did this morning. Jerry's going back 40, 50 years, giving the starting lineup and the final score. But as such a young player on that type of a stage, if he was a yeller, a screamer, I don't know which direction I would have taken at that age. I remember one game we were playing here, I was knocked down, I was hurt pretty bad, and the other section was cheering, and in fact, cheering very loudly. And I got up and, in no uncertain terms, let them know I was still number one. Jerry saw it, and it's about the maddest I've ever seen him get. And I sat, I don't know how many minutes I sat, but I sat, and I sat, and he sat me down, and it was the last time that ever happened. So again, it's, as I said, I've been blessed, all three of the coaches, the mentors, the men in my life, very similar in that character, and I couldn't be more fortunate.
Pete, you touched a little bit about the Baltimore Catholic League and what a crucible it is. And Jerry was one of the guys who formed the league back in 1971. And younger people know that Juan Dixon and Carmelo Anthony and now Phil Booth, they led teams to the NCAA championship. Some of us who have faulty memories forget that 30 years ago, a guy named Rodney Monroe came out of Hagerstown. And I like to think that his exposure in a big city helped him go to NC State and become a great, great player. Tony, can you talk about playing in the crucible of the Catholic League and what that did for you to be able to go halfway across the country and do what you did at Kansas?
Yeah, playing in the Catholic League meant everything. When you're that young, though, you don't even understand the level of competition at which you're playing compared to the rest of the country. Coach was such a great teacher and such a great technician that he taught us every aspect of the game. I think about how Pete, for as big as he was, he felt as comfortable facing the basket as he did with his back to the basket. And the same with me. He had the same expectations for me as well. Not only to be able to play facing the basket, but when necessary, to be able to play with my back to the basket. And those things served me well. And so when I got to the University of Kansas, it was a relatively smooth transition. The only thing I had to do was put on some weight and get stronger. But the foundation had been built. The foundation was there. And at that point, he allowed me the opportunity to be as good as I wanted to be. That's how good a teacher he was. That's how good a technician he was. And so when I got to the University of Kansas and you started playing these heated rivalries, KU versus MU, KU versus K-State, they were so intense, but because of where I came from, it was just a smooth transition. And not only was I not overwhelmed or intimidated by it, because of my preparation, I was able to embrace it.
Super. And before I forget, Tony has made his home in Kansas for how many years now?
34.
34 years. So he not only got an education, had a good career in Kansas, but he found a second home there. He's a State Farm executive for Lord knows how many years, right?
30 years.
30 years. Snuffy, you weren't there when the Baltimore Catholic League was was organized. You were an observer at the time, but then you became one of the volunteers. And I know when you were commissioner, you were not making Roger Goodell money.
Well, that was cold.
Can you educate us about the hours and the time and the effort that Jerry Savage put into the Baltimore Catholic League?
Be happy to. I think, as I look at it, the reason I got involved was we moved back to Baltimore in 1986, and I reconnected with the league, and Jerry and Ray Mullis, the late Ray Mullis, called me one day in the summer and said, "We'd like to have lunch with you." And I said, "Fine." So we went to lunch, and they said, "You know, we've been doing this. Ray does the schedule, I arranged the tournament, but we're getting to the point where it's so complicated and our meetings become a little bit, what's the word, dysfunctional before the tournament about seedings and what time and where you're going to play." So I said, "We'd like you to be the commissioner of the Catholic League." And I said, "Okay, what does that entail?" And they said, "Do everything that we do." So I let Mullis continue with the scheduling, and I took over the operation of the tournament and just helped out. Organizationally, we would meet during the season, usually at Mount St. Joe at night, and just try to keep things organized and on schedule, and started to raise some money for the league too, because the league has to support the teams that go to the Alhambra tournament, because they don't pay for everything when you go to Alhambra. So from that standpoint, and I did that for 5 years. But you know, I was around. Actually, I was refereeing basketball games in the Catholic League in '71 for Ed Harkinen, who was the official commissioner for one of the boards that was formed It was 290 and I board 23, and that was a new board. He wanted some officials, so I did that. And actually, one of the best games I did that year was I had Coward Hall at Loyola. And Snooky Bender, Coward Hall, who I played with at college, and Jerry Savage at Loyola, who I knew and admired from my days at the University of Baltimore. So I didn't call many fouls. Dumb, but I'm not stupid. But no, that's how basically I got involved, and then it just went on from there. Different people came in. Mark Russell took over. Jack DeGio's been doing it for a long time. The footprint for that tournament, though, is the tournament at the end of the year, which is by far, many college coaches will tell you, it is the premier Catholic tournament in the country, by far. With the alumni that come, it's an alumni event when they play. You may not see that team play all year, but when they're in the tournament, you'll come watch them, especially if they get to the finals. So it's been a fun experience to watch that evolve, and I guess I could say that the metamorphosis continues.
Thanks, Snuffy. And Mark Rohde is one of the benefactors of the Baltimore Catholic League tournament. I encourage you to read your program, every word that he wrote, because he's Jesuit trained. He's spent 4 years here and then 4 years at Loyola College. Is it okay to still call it Loyola College? And from a historical perspective, Tony was talking. Okay. Tony was talking about Pete playing facing the basket. Mark was the original point forward, correct? For Coach Savage. Okay. Anybody go to school with Tom Callahan, the author? Nobody from Tom Callahan. Wrote a great book, Johnny U. And I recommend you read it. It's 10 years old, and it's about John Unitas. And reading it, I found a lot of parallels between Jerry Savage and John Unitas. I remember when Jerry retired, John Stewart telling me the story that Jerry had the same thing for lunch every day, the sandwich and the snack and the drink every day. And John Unitas every day worked out with Raymond Berry. But the real takeaway from the book is that when the Colts are in trouble or when a player's struggling, John Unitas says to the guard who's getting beat, he says, what do you need? You need a draw play? When Jimmy Orr can't get open, he says, what do you need? You need an out? You need a slant? And essentially, that's meant for others. So I know that John Unitas didn't go to Loyola Blakefield, but it's meant for others. Can you, the three of you, talk about how Jerry, just by his example, underlined that and underscored that and made meant for others just a part of your life?
Well, I think, look around the room. Look at the people who played for him. Look at the way he conducted his life. Look at the way he coached his teams. They were sound fundamentally, well-schooled, well-drilled in fundamentals, and played hard, and they played smart. And the thing I loved about Jerry's teams, about men for others, is that at the end of the game, he was always humble in victory and gracious in defeat. So from that standpoint, that slogan that we have here is really meaningful. And in fact, we've given another one on top of that now. It's called Where Else? So we're going to continue with that. And again, it's a testimony to all the people here tonight to acknowledge him. One thing that I will add, Paul, I didn't know the story about Jimmy Savage and Kevin. I'm glad you told us about that at the beginning. Anyway, Pete.
Jerry was humble in defeat after he chewed us out in the locker room.
And on the court after the game.
I'm trying to remember humble in defeat. Jerry was a competitor. It's interesting the Johnny Unitas line, because I do remember kind of calm, cool, collected, that no matter where you were in a game. Very Dean Smith-esque. Dean, we joke about it all the time. We could be down 10 points with a minute to play, and he'd bring us into the huddle, sit us down, smile at us, and say, "This is fun, isn't it, guys? We're right where we want to be." It's one of his favorite sayings, "We're right where we want to be." We're like, "Coach, we're down 10 with a minute to play." And he would outline what we were going to do to win the game. And so there was just that eternal, Jerry was the same way. Now, when it didn't work out, that calm, cool, collected went away. But you always believed. You always believed, no matter where you were, what situation you were in a game, that you were going to pull it through. And again, that probably through osmosis serves you in life. It's a long ride. You're going to get through it. We're going to win this game, and if we don't, we're going to win the next one. But we're going to win this game. And you always believed. And I carried that, I think, throughout the good times and certainly throughout the bad times as well.
Pete mentioned when it didn't work out. Well, one thing about it, when it didn't work out, it was never Pete's fault. I want you to know that. I can remember times I'd pass the ball into Pete, he'd be in the low post, I'd pass him the ball and he'd drop it. And I'd look over the bench and coach is looking at me like, "Hey, can't you make a better pass than that?" I'm thinking, what, you want me to just go in there and hand it to him?
No, it was more like shoot, Tony, shoot the ball.
Coach, as Pete stated, his preparation was such that there was never a reason to panic. The preparation, can you ever recall us not being prepared to play a particular team or in a particular situation? He was a teacher. He was a teacher, and he taught us every aspect of the game. And until this day, I still can't believe, how did he know so much about basketball? I mean, the guy he was a guard. It's not like he... But he taught us post moves. He taught us how to pass the ball. He taught us how to play on the perimeter. He taught us how to box out. The guy was incredible. And I will say this. Being 4 years at the University of Kansas, I never heard anything said about basketball from any of the coaches that I hadn't heard before. His humility, though, I can recall on some days we'd have a game, the JV would play, the varsity would play. There'd be a baseball game, perhaps, and there'd be a wrestling match. And I'll never forget coming over one day and seeing Coach out on the baseball fields, lining up the baseball field. And then he'd come in and he'd go back into the room where the whirlpools, the hot tubs were, and make sure that the hot tubs were ready for those wrestlers who were trying to lose weight before they could get out there and compete. I mean, he had all of that on his mind, and yet when it came time for our game, he was fully engaged. He was totally there for us. Humility, yeah, a lot of it.
Thanks, Tony. Tony, you talked about the education that you got here on the basketball court, and obviously you got a pretty good education in the classroom too. Can you think of a game when you were in college or a professional experience when you were challenged and you leaned back on something that Jerry taught you? And Pete, you're going to answer the same question after Tony answers.
My freshman year in '78, we played Michigan State at Michigan State. And my assignment was Magic Johnson. Probably the worst game of my 4 years at Kansas. I was just totally, physically, he was just too big. He was too big and he was too good. And I didn't do a very good job, and I felt terrible about it. So my freshman year, I guard Magic. My senior year, I get to guard Michael. And I guarded everybody in between. And other than the game at Michigan State, I can't recall, again, I was ready to go. I was ready to go. And if you charted my progression from my freshman year to my senior year, I improved every year that I was at Kansas. And it was just like it was when I was here. I improved every year that I was here. Because Coach gave me the tools that I needed in order to compete. And all I had to do was just remember the lessons that I had learned.
Yeah, Tony talks about his challenges freshman, senior year. I had different challenges freshman, senior year. I got injured. I dealt with a lot of injuries my first year and my last year in college. And for me, again, I've probably said a lot about it. It's the ability, learning what I learned here, to deal with a lot of difficulties really off the court, which were injuries. I was young when I started college, turned 17, and so still very sort of immature, probably mentally and physically. Going into a college environment, certainly going into North Carolina, under that microscope, and then having to deal immediately with an injury was difficult, very difficult for me. I worked through that a lot with what I had learned here. Again, you're never out of it. There's always another game, there's always another day. Keep your head up. Walk through it with humility. Be determined. Continue to compete. And I did that and worked through that. And probably the worst thing was my senior year. I not only had the ankle injury, but early in the year broke my leg, which not a lot of people remember before my ankle injury. So I had 2 serious injuries my senior year. I had the opportunity to redshirt. Dean had never redshirted a player before, and he asked me to redshirt after my first injury. And I said no. I expected to come back around the middle of the season. I ultimately did. I played 2 games. I tore my ankle up, and I was out for the rest of the season. I did play in the national championship in 1981. It was the first game I had actually suited up after my injury. And I was seated next to Dean Smith as we started to play Indiana. And I turned to him, I said, "Coach, put me in the game." He said, "Pete, can you run?" I said, "Not too well, but I want to play." And he knew how disappointed I was with that season. And to his credit, as I'm sure Jerry would have done, he let me go in and play. I ran up and down the court halfway 3 times. I shot an air ball from the corner. It's on film. I gave Coach Smith the tired signal so that it would be my decision to be taken out and not his. And that was my senior year. But through all of that, the lessons learned at Loyola, the lessons learned with Jerry, helped me to cope with that. It was very difficult to come back. And I'm so glad that I did.
Pete, remind folks who came in for you when you came out of the starting lineup. Who was the guy who came in to the Carolina starting lineup?
Sam Perkins.
That put things in perspective. Pete, how old were you when you got your Carolina degree?
21. I hope you knew the answer to this. So it's 21.
You weren't redshirt.
21, that's correct. Yeah.
Back before we redshirt. Snuffy, when you were we talked about osmosis and just learning from Jerry just by watching what he does. And you talked about the range wars that were going among the coaches in the Baltimore Catholic League, and you're trying to rein these guys in. Was there ever a time or an instance when you would say, what would Jerry do?
Jerry, first of all, my wife Terry and I were at the Final Four in '81, and I remember that air ball. So you not only can't pass, you can't shoot. Now, Jerry was the voice of reason at the Catholic League meetings. He really was. Things would get somewhat heated. There were some rivalries at that time, as you can probably imagine. And it didn't always go the way that some of those schools wanted it to go with certain issues. But Jerry could be counted on, and the great movement, while I'm up there with a gun and a whip trying to train these guys, and Jerry would raise his hand and say, now wait a minute. And that's all they'd have to hear, and then we would come back to some sense of normalcy. So he had a steadying influence on the league, even up through the night that he had his attack, because he had done the semifinal game at Towson University as the scorekeeper. So he was still involved. The last thing he said was, get the scorebook to the tournament. So, because we had one scorebook for all those years. But he had he even had an influence after he left coaching. I mean, he really did. So, but he kept the lid on at some of the meetings.
About a month before Jerry took ill, I went to Mount St. Joe because I had to see elephants fly. Our Lady of Mount Carmel was ranked #1 in the Baltimore Sun rankings. I said, I can't believe this. So I went to St. Joe. Mount Carmel's playing at St. Joe. Mount Carmel's pretty good. But I'm sitting in the last row where I always sit, and Jerry walks in, and he's got an extra copy of the standings and an extra copy of the schedule, and men for others. He was looking out for people. We've talked about the league, and you've talked in general terms about some of your experiences here. Tell us about the Holy Wars in the Baltimore Catholic League specifically, whether it's going up against TC or Gibbons or Calvert Hall. Usually that name should not be spoken here. But Pete and Tony, can you remember some specific Baltimore Catholic League games, be it at the tournament, be it here, be it on the road? It's a good exercise for me.
First of all, I think, is Joe Byrne still here? I think we need to give some credit. We've used some mighty big words tonight: osmosis, crucible. I'm just so thankful that I'm not being stumped here with some of the words. So,
I went to Towson, you went to Chapel.
gosh, there were so many of them. We were talking throughout the night about all of the games that we played. It seems that there was never a night off. And wasn't that fun? I mean, I can't, who did we blow out? Not many guys. I mean, we beat a lot of teams. I'm not sure we blew out that many because they were all that good. And I don't know if Jerry had something to do with setting this. I don't know who set the schedule, but it was trial by fire. And they threw us into the crucible and crunched us up pretty good. It was fun. All I remember is again, how fun it was to compete at that level, to compete against those guys. I'm the kind of player that I kind of go mental when I play. I was a very quiet, almost shy kid, but not on the court. And it was that environment, gosh, every night that just brought that out. Some of my favorite games were, frankly, I remember playing DeMatha for some reason. Because it was such an event. We would play the game down in UMBC, and DeMatha would bring their fans up and sit on one side of the court. We would bring our fans down and sit on the other side of the court. We'd bring our male cheerleaders with their megaphones and their yellow sweaters. Remember that? The sweater vests. and very, proper kind of cheers, and they would bring their cheerleaders, and we'd be just, you can imagine. But boy, did we have some games. Plunkett, I know what's, all of these years, I think I still see the Spalding on your head. For those of you who remember, Hawkeye Whitney. Now this is a guy, Hawkeye had to be 35 years old. This was a man. But Hawkeye Whitney, a ball was going out of bounds once, and Brian was sort of stumbling after it. Hawkeye got his hand on it and went backhanded to save it in bounds, off Brian's head. And I swear, it went up to almost the rafters. But those were some games, and those were some games when they took the best in Baltimore, the best in DC, threw us into the lion's den, and just said, have at it, guys. And man, those are some fun nights.
Yeah, I think Coach loved every minute of it. The Baltimore Catholic League was tough enough, but as Pete was talking about, we played everybody. We played DeMatha, we played Lake Clifton, we played Annapolis, we played Macklin, and this is when these programs were at their finest. They had great teams, and we played everybody. And I think Coach enjoyed every minute of it. For me, Gibbons was always the toughest matchup for me because I had to guard this guy named Quentin Dale. And as much fun as we had playing, it's not a lot of fun when you can't sleep the night before the game. And you can't sleep the night after the game. Quentin was just that good. That it took all that I had to just hold him to 35. But the challenge was I loved the challenge. And you had asked the question earlier, and I don't think I answered it. You were just talking about, well, what else did I get out of Loyola? And as I look at Coach Broom and Coach Knoll and Coach Stewart, there was just a culture here that the expectation was excellence, no matter whether it was on the court or in the classroom. The expectation was excellence. And as much as Coach gave me in terms of my development as a basketball player, I thank God that he gave me even more to help me in my development as a man. And that's really what it's all about. What kind of husbands do we become? And what kind of fathers do we become?
Tony, Pete, you played for Jerry. Snuffy, you played for Ed Hargan. Can the three of you, starting with Snuffy, talk about, I presume that there was very little different from the culture on the playing field here and on the basketball court than there was in the classroom. Same rigor, same standards. Can all three of you share your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I can talk about the comparison, but before I do, I need to mention, I was at the game where Brian Plunkett got hit in the head. I was sitting behind the basket at that end of the court, and those of you who know Brian, I'm not sure it hasn't had a lasting effect. Ed Hargan, who was here 40-some years as a football, basketball coach, and athletic director, primarily basketball, was very, very similar to Jerry in the way we prepared and practiced. Stickler for details, no nonsense at practice. We worked hard, we went from situation to situation, worked a lot on fundamentals. He was not a screamer necessarily, except at the officials. But I think the comparison is good because I watched Jerry's teams practice too when I was recruiting, and I would come out and watch them. And basically, the setting was the same, the mentality was the same. The skills development was a little bit different, but basically we were doing the same things. We just didn't roll the ball out and run up and down the court and play. And in terms of preparation, I'll tell you a quick story about Ed Hargan. the day before we played Towson Catholic in their gym, if anybody's ever been in there, it's an oblong telephone booth. And what Ed would do would be take the benches from the side court that the team sat on, move them inside the sideline, and we basically created Towson Catholic's court, and he put a line where the midcourt would be, so if you went too far to the sideline, your shins would hit the bench. So you had to do all of your movement inside the framework of that environment. And I thought that was one of the best preparations we could have ever had. And he did things like that. But basically, I can tell you from both practices, they weren't that far apart. They were generations apart in some respect, because the game has changed and evolved. But I think to compare the two, it's they were very similar, very, very similar, and their demeanors were about the same too.
So Pete and Tony, contrast Jerry in the classroom, on the basketball court, to what you found from folks other than Jerry in the classroom. Was there a continuity there from the expectations that you met on the basketball court and in the classroom?
I think when I first got here to Loyola, I may have seen myself as a basketball player first. By the time I left Loyola, I just saw myself as a guy who just happened to play basketball. And so that was a transformation that took place simply because the teachers I came in contact here, I knew cared about me. My freshman year, I almost flunked out. I was really struggling. And I remember Brother Cawthorn coming to me and saying, "Young man, you've got a lot of potential, but you better get your act together, or you won't be here very long." And it was a tough conversation, but it was one that needed to be had. And right then and there, I realized that they just wanted to see me succeed totally, and not just on the basketball court. And that was very, very important.
Yeah, I think it was, the expectation was that you would perform. We had the opportunity to come here because of basketball. I don't really recall that much being treated like a basketball player on campus. Certainly not by the teachers. There was no quarter given because we had to go to practice or we had a tough game the night before. We might have lost and might have been down and maybe couldn't do our homework. There was none of that. No excuses. Pick your head up, do your work, do what's expected of you, and move on. Compare and contrast, with Jerry and our teachers. My French teacher was a lot cuter than Jerry. She was, I'm sorry. But no, I think it was the same. Jerry expected you to show up every day ready to play. He expected you to listen. He expected you to do your job. And he treated us like men, even though, frankly, we weren't. I know I wasn't. But that's the way that we were treated. And I think that that's contrasted with where I had been just the prior year in public school. There was just a complete expectation that you had a level of maturity that was probably well beyond my years. And again, through that day in and day out, you just kind of start towing the line. And no one would expect or no one would accept anything less from us, I think, in the classroom or on the court.
I just wanted to add something. We were talking about how difficult the Catholic League was back when we were playing, and it was extremely competitive. But I got to tell you, when the games got tough, it was awful comforting to know all we had to do was pass the ball inside to this guy. You know, I was looking at some stats before I came here because I knew Pete was a great scorer. But I don't know what was wrong with me because I think he was a pretty good passer too. And so I looked at some of the stats and I saw where his sophomore year he maybe had 15 assists. His junior year he may have had 10 assists. And I thought, oh no, I guess he wasn't that great of a passer.
You forgot to add that my junior year was when you came, Tony.
We could do that. These two could go at it all night long. And we will, in a different format in a few minutes. It's very curious that Tony went to the University of Kansas and that Pete went to the University of North Carolina, two of the top 5 basketball programs in the history of the game. And it's very interesting that you found places, you sought out places with tradition because you came from a place with tradition. We look out there's that Hardigan Field. We walk down the hallway there, and there's Jerry Savage Court. And this is a place that embraces its traditions for good reason. I remember being spellbound in 1972 watching the Munich Olympics because I was a runner, because I was too short to play basketball. And I still run, and I remember being spellbound by the words of the Loyola Blakefield guy, Jim McKay. This place is about tradition. With that, I want to bring up our next speaker, who's part of that tradition, Coach Diwali. Josh came to Loyola Blakefield in 2005-06 season. He's a science teacher here. Is 12 seasons the third longest tenure in the history of the program? I know you're never supposed to ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But are you the third longest tenured coach here?
I didn't know that.
Well, in researching these guys, it's interesting. The Baltimore Sun and the Evening Sun had different heights for Tony when they were writing their Player of the Year stories about you. One said you were 6'5", one you said you were 6'6". So I'll shoot for accuracy here. 20 years ago, Josh was a senior at Cardinal Gibbons School. When he was a sophomore, he helped the Crusaders to the Baltimore Catholic League Tournament Championship. When he was a senior, he was part of the Baltimore Catholic League All-Tournament team. He went up to Massachusetts to go to college for a while, came back home to go to Towson University. He was the Defensive Player of the Year there. And he was the 4th coach in as many years here at Loyola Blakefield. And he is a stable man. It's a stable place, full of tradition, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that tradition.
I first want to thank the people that made this night possible. A couple of them have mentioned already. Mark Rohde, Brian Plunkett, Snuffy Smith have just been really instrumental in organizing this event and making it possible for us to have this. But Pat Muth and Todd Langenberg, our development team, Mike Keeney, and certainly Anthony Day have been very instrumental as well. And our panelists. It's great having alums come back and talk about their experiences here on the court, but also in the classroom, and to see where they have gone from their time here at Loyola. There's certainly a great history of Loyola basketball, and it's great to see that the program means a lot to so many people. Much of that history is written in what's said by Coach Savage, and we heard a lot of that tonight at the beginning of the evening. It has been a pleasure of the entire basketball coaching staff to continue that history. We strive to lead the program in the right direction, doing things the right way, just like Coach Savage did for 35 years. The really exciting thing for me is that we have about 45 young men and their families and many prospective Dons and their families that will build on the history of Coach Savage and walk in the same footsteps that many of you did here at Loyola, in the classroom and on the basketball court. Those kids and those families are trying to create the same memories that many of you talked about tonight, and many of the same memories we heard from these guys up front. I've gotten to know many of you through conversations about your playing days with Coach Savage, maybe played against you when you were here at Loyola, or maybe by having you as part of the program over the last 11 years. I really hope to further those conversations and those relationships in the future. So feel free to reach out to me about anything Loyola basketball related or otherwise, including information about a neighbor who may be 6'7" in the 7th grade. And I appreciate all of you being here tonight, because your presence here tonight is instrumental to our program. It's instrumental to the kids that are at Loyola now and the kids that will be at Loyola in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. One of the tasks that I take for myself at the Catholic Review is every Catholic Schools Week we have a tuition chart that runs every private high school in the Baltimore metropolitan area. And I get a real lesson in the sacrifice that parents and families make to send children to Catholic schools, and what a great value is when we compare it to our private school peers. There's no better value in secondary education in the state of Maryland, this place right here. And Snuffy, thank you. Pete, thank you. Tony, thank you. Folks, let's give a round of applause to our panelists.